September 1939. Eastern Poland. A small infantry regiment marches down a dirt road at dawn. Dust rises around their boots. Their name is barely mentioned in the records that survived. Yet for a few weeks, they stood at the edge of a collapsing world. In the late summer of 1939, Poland stood on the threshold of a catastrophe that many had feared, but few truly understood. The map still showed borders that had been won and defended after the First World War. Officers still read the same manuals. Soldiers still train on wide plains under watchful skies. Among them was an infantry formation known simply as a line regiment. It did not belong to the elite. It did not receive special attention. It existed to do its duty, quietly, like thousands of others. Most of its men came from farming towns and small railway settlements. They joined the army for steady pay or out of a sense of obligation. Their uniforms were worn but well kept. Their rifles were old but serviceable. They drilled, they marched, they stood in formation on cracked parade grounds. There were rumors about German troops massing on the western frontier. Radio broadcasts hinted at negotiations. Older officers reassured the younger ones that Europe had been on the brink of war before and stepped back. Life went on. The regiment waited. In early August, new maps arrived from headquarters. There were orders for redeployment. Trains carried the regiment east, then south, then north again. The movements made little sense to the soldiers sitting on wooden benches inside the wagons. They stared through narrow windows at fields and forests passing by like blurred paintings. No one told them that command struggled to predict where the blow would fall. They were just told to be ready. By the final days of August, they were positioned along a stretch of countryside dotted with birch trees and scattered farms. The officers studied the approaches. They marked possible artillery positions. They introduced field discipline more strictly. Soldiers dug shallow trenches and stacked ammunition crates. The nights became quieter. Even laughter around campfires faded. Everyone waited for a sound that had not yet come. On the first day of September, that silence ended. The regiment heard engines in the distance. They saw smoke on the horizon. Messages arrived that the border had been crossed at multiple points. The regiment was ordered to hold its sector as long as possible. No speeches were made. No heroic declarations were recorded. The men simply took their positions. In those first hours, they still believed that reinforcements would arrive. That the front would stabilize. That the world they knew, though shaken, would survive. What they did not know was that their story would barely be written down. The pages that should have preserved their names would one day go missing, scattered by defeat, occupation, and time. The regiment soon found itself facing a modern army advancing with speed and precision. Columns appeared at the tree line. Armored vehicles rolled across fields the soldiers had expected to defend with rifles and light machine guns. Communication lines faltered. Runners carried messages under fire. Reports arrived late, incomplete, or not at all. The men adapted as best they could. Platoons fell back to secondary positions. A farmhouse became a command post. A narrow bridge turned into a defensive anchor. Mortar crews worked methodically, counting each round. Riflemen watched the edges of the fields where dark shapes moved through fog and dust. Orders were short and direct. Hold. Delay. Withdraw only when necessary. Every hour brought new complications. Roads clogged with refugees. Horses panicked under artillery blasts. Supply wagons became targets. The regiment tried to shield civilians when it could, but the flow of people never stopped. Families passed through in silence, carrying bundles, pushing carts, looking for safety that no longer existed. The soldiers began to understand that the country around them was dissolving. There were decisions to make. Should they make a stand in one place and risk encirclement? Or should they move constantly, trading space for time? The officers debated by lantern light at night. Maps were spread across tables scarred with knife marks. Names of villages were whispered like uncertain coordinates. Eventually, they chose a pattern of short, stubborn defenses followed by quiet withdrawals. Each action bought a few more hours. Each hour cost something in lives and strength. Morale did not collapse. It thinned. The regiment felt increasingly isolated. Neighboring units vanished from radio contact. Some had been overrun. Others were retreating in different directions. The chain of command stretched until it was little more than rumor. Yet the men continued to follow their immediate leaders, those they could still see and hear. The fighting was uneven. At times it seemed almost old-fashioned, infantry advancing through fields, exchanging fire across hedgerows. At other times, technology dominated everything. Aircraft appeared overhead without warning. Their shadows crossed the ground like silent threats. Bombs fell. Trenches shook. Dust and debris blurred the horizon into a gray haze. Still, the regiment endured. It did not win great victories. It did not appear in the headlines. It held where it was told to hold. It withdrew when told to withdraw. It remained a small part of a collapsing front, a fragment of a larger story that no one could fully see. And as the days passed, the sense grew that their actions might never be recorded properly. That the details would vanish with the paper, the archives, the lives. The decisive moment came in mid-September, when the regiment received orders to block a key road leading toward a strategic town. It was a narrow corridor bordered by low hills and patches of woodland. If enemy forces broke through there, they would have an open route to the interior. The regiment, worn and reduced, was told to hold it for as long as possible. They entrenched themselves along ridges and ditches. Machine gun teams chose fields of fire. Scouts positioned themselves at crossroads. The officers walked the line, speaking quietly, checking ammunition, mapping out fallback points that few believed they would reach in time. There was no illusion. They were outnumbered. They were outgunned. But they were still present. The attack began at dawn. First came artillery, methodical and heavy. Earth erupted. Trees splintered. Trenches turned into broken scars in the soil. Then armored vehicles advanced, supported by infantry. The regiment responded with everything it had left. Anti-tank rifles fired at close range. Grenades arced through smoke. Signals were relayed by shouted words because radios had failed or been destroyed. For hours, the position held. Each success felt temporary. Every meter of ground was contested. Casualties mounted. Stretcher bearers moved between craters. Officers took the places of fallen sergeants. Groups of men fought in isolation, unsure of the larger situation but unwilling to abandon their posts. By midday, the regiment had been pushed back into fragmented pockets. The road was still contested, but the enemy pressure increased. Ammunition ran low. Water supplies dwindled. The once orderly structure of the unit dissolved into clusters still trying to obey orders that could no longer reach them. Some attempted a breakout through the woods. Others stayed where they were, delaying the advance minute by minute. The landscape filled with smoke and silence broken only by sporadic gunfire. When the fighting finally ended, the regiment was effectively gone as an organized force. There was no formal surrender ceremony recorded. No speech. No final parade. Survivors slipped away or were captured. Officers vanished into the countryside, trying to regroup, often failing. Many names disappeared into lists that would later be lost, misfiled, or destroyed during occupation. The road was eventually taken. The town beyond it fell. The regiment had achieved only one thing: time. Time for others to withdraw. Time for civilians to escape. Time that history would barely notice. And with that, the regiment passed out of existence as quietly as it had lived. The regiment faded from view. Not suddenly. Slowly. Quietly. Like mist leaving a field at dawn. The uniforms wore out. Buttons loosened. Cloth thinned. Boots cracked in the cold. What once looked solid began to fray. The men went home. Or they did not. Some returned to villages. Others vanished along the roads. Families waited. Letters stopped. Doors stayed open too long. Then closed without answers. Records disappeared first. Paper is fragile. Ink fades. Archives burn. Boxes are moved. Labels fall off. A war ends. Then another begins. Documents change hands. Offices are cleared. Shelves are emptied. Files are lost. Sometimes deliberately. Sometimes by chance. A name becomes a number. A number is misplaced. A life becomes a blank space. The fields healed. Grass grew over trenches. Rain filled dugouts. The road was repaired. Wool tracks faded. Birds returned to the trees. Quiet replaced gunfire. Only fragments remained. A rusted canteen. A broken buckle. A button found by a farmer's plow. He placed it on a windowsill. Then forgot it was there. Years passed. Memories thinned. Stories shortened. Children listened. Then stopped asking. Old soldiers spoke less. Faces blurred. Photographs curled at the edges. Some were thrown away. Others stayed in drawers. Unlabeled. Unclaimed. Unexplained. The regiment became a rumor. Mentioned rarely. Footnotes only. A line in a damaged ledger. A paragraph in a local history. Dates without details. Ranks without men. Events without witnesses. Gaps widened. Questions multiplied. Answers dissolved. The landscape forgot them first. Then the towns. Then the archives. Then the language of those who knew. A silence settled in layers. Thick. Still. Uneventful. Normal life returned. Shops opened. Fields were harvested. Children played. Dogs barked. Trains passed. And somewhere, an unmarked ridge looked down on a narrow road. The same road. Quiet again. Empty. Cars move there now. Drivers do not know. They do not need to. History does not insist. It simply waits. Sometimes forever. The regiment remained. But only as absence. No monuments rose. No speeches were made. No yearly ceremonies. Only the wind. Only the trees. Only the slow work of forgetting. What happened stayed real. But it slipped beyond reach. Beyond records. Beyond family stories. Beyond memory. A missing chapter. Written once. Then erased. Not by force. But by time. And so the regiment ended. Without witnesses. Without farewell. Without echo. Just silence. These stories are rarely told. Subscribe if you want to hear the next one.